I never thought hiring someone to clean my son's house while he was away would be the moment that changed everything, but that's exactly what happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, and I'm still not sure I've fully processed it, even now. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm a 63-year-old retired school principal from Barrie, Ontario, and I have a granddaughter named Abby who is 7 years old and deserves every good thing in this world. What I found that afternoon, what the cleaner called to tell me, her voice barely holding together, shook me to my core in a way I haven't felt since my wife passed 8 years ago. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how we got there. My son Patrick is 37. He works in commercial real estate in Toronto, makes good money, drives a nice truck, and spends it like the tap will never run dry. His first marriage ended when Abby was 2. Her mother, Cheryl, was a nurse who was diagnosed with an aggressive form of ovarian cancer about a year after the divorce. She fought hard. God, she fought. But she passed away when Abby was just 4 years old. Patrick was awarded full custody by default, more than anything because Cheryl's family was scattered across the country and Patrick was local. I never said anything out loud, but I always felt a quiet unease watching Patrick parent. He loved Abby, I believe that. But loving a child and knowing how to raise one are very different things. And when he started dating Sandra about 2 years after Cheryl died, that unease turned into something I couldn't quite name. Sandra is 32. She has a loud laugh and an expensive wardrobe, and she treats every house she enters like a hotel she's reviewing. She moved in with Patrick about 8 months after they started dating, which was fast. Too fast, I thought. But I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to be the meddling father-in-law, and because Patrick was an adult, and it wasn't my place. What I noticed, though, was how Sandra was with Abby. Not cruel exactly. Never where I could point and say that was wrong. But cold. The way you might be cold to a stranger's child you've been asked to babysit against your will. She never sat with Abby on the couch, never asked about her drawings, and Abby drew constantly. Little animals mostly, and houses with flower gardens. Sandra called her clingy once, just casually, the way you'd mention the weather. I let that slide too. I wish I hadn't. Abby started calling me Grandpa Ted when she was 3. I lived about 40 minutes away, and she'd come stay with me most weekends until Patrick and Sandra started taking more trips. Cottage weekends in Muskoka, skiing in Tremblant, a long weekend in New York, just the two of them. I told myself that was normal. Couples need time. But the weekends, Abby came to me, got fewer, and when they did, she was quieter than I remembered. Last September, Patrick told me he and Sandra were planning a trip to Tofino, British Columbia. 11 days. He said he'd arranged everything for Abby, not to worry. I asked if she was coming to stay with me, and he said no. Sandra had found a babysitter situation, and it was easier. I didn't push. I should have pushed. It was Sandra's idea to have my house checked while they were gone. Not Patrick, actually. She'd called me the week before they left, asking if I could drive by once or twice to make sure the heat wasn't acting up and the mail wasn't piling up. There'd been a problem with the furnace the winter before. I said of course, and then she mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that she'd been meaning to have the whole place cleaned while they were away. A full, deep clean. She said something about wanting it spotless when they got back. She asked if I'd mind coordinating it since I had a key. That surprised me a little. Sandra asking for my help, but I said yes. I called Miriam, a woman who ran a small cleaning company out of Innisfall that a colleague of mine had used for years. Miriam sent over 2 of her people that Tuesday morning. I dropped off the key at 8:30, gave them the code to the alarm, and said the house was empty and they had the whole day. Miriam called me at 11:47. I was in the middle of making lunch, and I almost didn't pick up because I didn't recognize the number at first. But something made me answer. "Mr. Calloway," she said, and right away I knew something was wrong because her voice had that particular quality, careful, controlled, that people use when they're trying not to alarm you while they are very much alarmed. "One of my girls found something upstairs, in the back bedroom, the one with the locked door." I said, "Which bedroom?" "That's just the guest room, I think." She said, "The door was locked from the outside. My girl had to use a bobby pin. She thought maybe it was a pet, maybe a cat had gotten trapped. "Sir, there's a child in there." I put down my sandwich. I said, "What?" She said, "A little girl. She says her name is Abby. She's not hurt, but she's very thin, and she's frightened, and she says she hasn't eaten since yesterday morning. She has some crackers and a water bottle that's mostly empty, and she's been sleeping on a camping mattress. My girl is with her right now. We didn't know whether to call you or call 911. I was already putting on my coat. "Call 911, I said, "and stay with her. I'm on my way." I don't remember the drive clearly. I know I was going too fast on the 400. I remember my hands shaking on the wheel and thinking, "Stay calm, Ted. Stay calm. She needs you calm." When I got there, a police cruiser was already in the driveway. I walked in and one of the officers met me in the hallway. A young woman, Officer Chen. She introduced herself. She told me Abby was okay, that the paramedics had checked her, and she was dehydrated and underweight, but not in immediate medical danger. I asked to see her, and Officer Chen looked at me carefully for a moment, then nodded and led me upstairs. The back bedroom. I'd been in that house dozens of times, and I'd barely registered that door. It had always been shut. I assumed storage. I assumed nothing, really. That's the thing. I never thought to question a closed door. The room itself was small. A bare bulb overhead, the camping mattress Miriam had described, a thin blanket, a plastic bag with some broken crackers and animal crackers, a stuffed rabbit. I recognized. Abby had carried that rabbit everywhere when she was 3. There was a little pail in the corner that I didn't look at too long. The window was small and high and covered with a blackout curtain. Abby was sitting on the mattress with a young woman from Miriam's crew. Destiny, I learned her name was, who had her arm around her and was reading to her from a flyer she'd found somewhere. Just making up a story to go along with the pictures, trying to keep her calm. Abby was wearing a long-sleeve shirt and leggings. Her hair was unbrushed and there were dark circles under her eyes. But when she looked up and saw me, her face changed in a way that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "Grandpa Ted," she said, and she started to cry. I crossed the room and held her, and I let her cry, and I did not let myself cry because she needed me to be the steady one. I told her she was safe. I told her I was here. I told her I was here. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. Over the next hour, between Officer Chen asking quiet questions and Abby slowly answering in small pieces, I began to understand what had been happening in that house. Sandra had locked Abby in that room the night before they left for Tofino. Patrick had apparently gone along with it, or had at minimum allowed it to happen. Abby told Officer Chen that Sandra had started putting her in that room when she was being too much, which had started about 6 months ago with a couple of hours and had gradually extended. She said sometimes she got food and sometimes she didn't. She said her dad had told her it was temporary, that it was just while they sorted some things out, and that she wasn't supposed to tell anyone. She'd been in that room for 4 days when Miriam's crew found her. Patrick and Sandra were in Tofino. They had 7 days left on their trip. I'm going to be honest with you. I felt something in that moment that I'm not proud of and that I would never act on, but that every parent and grandparent will understand. It was a cold, focused rage that I hadn't felt since my years as a principal dealing with people who hurt children. I pressed it down. I kept my voice level. I focused on Abby. The officers were professional and kind. They explained that Children's Aid Society, CAS, would need to be involved immediately, and that, given the circumstances, Abby would need to be placed somewhere safe while the investigation began. I asked if she could stay with me. There was a process, Officer Chen explained. They'd need to do a home assessment. There were protocols. But she said the fact that I was immediate family and that Abby clearly had an established relationship with me was in my favor. I called my daughter-in-law's. Patrick's number. It went to voicemail. I called Sandra's number. Voicemail. I left a message that was measured and direct. "Patrick, the police are at your house. You need to call me immediately." He called back 40 minutes later. I'll never forget what he said first. Not, "Is Abby okay?" Not, "What happened?" He said, "Dad, it's not what it looks like." I said, Your daughter was locked in a room with a pail to relieve herself and a half bottle of water. What is it, then? He was quiet for a long time. He said, Sandra thought it would help her behavior. It was only supposed to be for a few days. I said, come home, Patrick. He came home. Not immediately. It was another day and a half, which tells you something. Sandra apparently needed time to process. By the time they landed at Pearson and drove up to Bury, Abby had been assessed by a pediatrician, interviewed by a cast worker named Miss Moss, Beaumont, who was thorough and compassionate and was sleeping in my spare bedroom with her stuffed rabbit and a bowl of my chicken soup that I'd made from scratch because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. The pediatrician's report was stark. Abby was significantly underweight for her age. She'd lost almost 4 kilograms in the preceding few months. She had signs of chronic stress consistent with prolonged anxiety. There were vitamin deficiencies. Nothing broken, nothing that couldn't heal, but the picture it painted was not of a bad few days, it was of months. That was the part that kept me up at night. Months. The Cass investigation moved quickly. Miss Beaumont was thorough. Patrick and Sandra were interviewed separately. Their accounts did not align particularly well. Patrick tried to frame it as a discipline approach they'd read about online, some sort of calm-down space. Ms. Beaumont pointed out, very calmly, that a locked room with no regular access to food or a bathroom is not a calm-down space. It is confinement. It is, under the Criminal Code of Canada, a form of child abandonment and unlawful confinement. The police laid charges. Patrick was charged with failure to provide the necessaries of life under Section 215 of the Criminal Code. Sandra faced the same charge, plus unlawful confinement. Both were charged. Patrick's lawyer, and Patrick did lawyer up almost immediately, which was its own kind of answer, tried to negotiate. There were discussions I wasn't privy to. What I do know is that the family court process for custody ran parallel to the criminal process, and in family court I retained a lawyer of my own. I should mention something here that I was careful to get right because I wanted this to hold up. Cheryl, when she was ill and knew what was coming, had worked with a lawyer to establish a trust for Abby through her life insurance policy. The trust was administered by a trustee, a family friend of Cheryl's named Ms. Adiemi, and was earmarked for Abby's education and care. Patrick received nothing from this trust. It was Abby's money, structured properly and cleanly. I mention this because the court needed to understand that Abby's financial future was secure regardless of where she was placed, and because I wanted there to be absolutely no question about money in any of this. My lawyer, a woman named Ms. Kowalski, who came highly recommended by a former colleague, filed for grandparent custody on my behalf. In Ontario, grandparents don't have automatic custody rights, but the court considers the best interests of the child above everything else. Given the circumstances, given Abby's established relationship with me, given the pediatric report and the Cass findings, Ms. Kowalski felt we had a strong case. Patrick did not fight the custody application. That surprised me at first. Then I understood. Fighting it would have meant going into court and explaining, under oath and on the record, exactly what his daughter's living situation had been for the past several months. His lawyer advised him, I imagine, that conceding custody was the better option for his criminal case. Sandra and Patrick separated within 3 weeks of coming home. I don't know the details of that. I don't particularly want to. The day Abby officially became my ward, the day the court order was signed, I took her to Tim Hortons and let her get a hot chocolate and a glazed Timbit, and we sat by the window and watched it snow for a while. And she told me about a book she'd been reading at her new school and a friend she'd made named Gracie, and I just listened. I didn't say anything meaningful. I didn't try to have a big conversation. She didn't need that from me. She just needed someone sitting there paying attention who wasn't going anywhere. I enrolled her in school in Barrie. Her teacher, Mr. Fontaine, called me after the first week to say she was bright and curious and a little quiet, but settling in. That phone call meant more to me than I can properly express. A teacher who notices a child, it matters more than most people know. The therapy was my idea. A child psychologist who worked with trauma, a kind and unhurried man named Dr. Park, began seeing Abby every 2 weeks. She was reluctant at first, children often are, but within a couple of months, she started talking about her sessions in that offhand way kids do when something is actually helping. She told me once that Dr. Park had a fish tank in his office, and she liked watching the fish while she talked. Patrick's criminal case moved through the system slowly, the way these things do in Ontario. He eventually pleaded guilty to the Section 215 charge in exchange for the more serious charge being withdrawn. He received a conditional sentence, no jail time, which I found very hard, and which I will be honest about. I sat in that courtroom and I looked at the judge and I thought, that's it? But Ms. Kowalski had prepared me for the possibility. She told me the criminal justice system and the family law system work differently, and that what mattered for Abby's day-to-day life was the custody order, not the sentence. She was right. I know she was right. It still sat uneasily. Sandra received a similar disposition. She has no role in Abby's life. That is the court order, and that is how it will remain. Patrick asked to see Abby about 4 months after everything was settled. I spoke to Ms. Beaumont and Dr. Park before making any decision. Dr. Park said Abby was not ready and that any contact should be at Abby's initiation when and if she ever chose it. I relayed this to Patrick through my lawyer. He accepted it. I don't know what he feels about it. I don't know what I feel about it, honestly. He is still my son, and that is something I have had to sit with in ways I haven't entirely worked out. What I know is that Abby is 8 now. She has a room in my house that she decorated herself. Pale yellow walls, a map of Canada she got from the library, and tacked up above her desk, a shelf of chapter books she reads with a flashlight under the covers when she thinks I don't know. She comes into the kitchen in the mornings in her socks, and she pushes the stool to the counter to help me make eggs. She has a best friend, Gracie, who comes over on Fridays, and they build elaborate things out of cardboard and tape. She is doing well in school. She laughs at things that aren't that funny, and she asks questions that make me think. She drew a picture of the two of us last month, standing in front of the house with the garden, and taped it to the fridge. I think about Miriam and her crew sometimes. I think about Destiny, who sat with Abby and made up a story from a flyer. I haven't been able to fully thank either of them in a way that feels adequate. You don't have words for someone who was in the right place and chose to be kind. I think about what would have happened if Sandra hadn't offhandedly asked me to coordinate that cleaning. I think about it too much, probably. I don't like where those thoughts go, so I try to redirect. She's here. She's okay. That's what I come back to. I was a principal for 22 years. I saw a lot of children move through hard circumstances. I always believed that one steady adult, just one, can change the entire arc of a child's life. I said that to parents and teachers for 2 decades. I thought I understood it. I understand it better now. I keep coming back to the locked door. Not because I'm angry anymore, though I was, and I won't pretend otherwise. I keep coming back to it because of what it represents. A door locked from the outside is a choice. Every single day that it stayed locked was another choice. And Patrick and Sandra made that choice over and over again for months, while Abby grew quieter and thinner and learned to wait in the dark without crying too loudly. That's not a mistake. That's a character. That's who you are when no one is watching. I've thought about that a lot. The version of yourself that shows up when there are no consequences in sight. Patrick thought he was in Tofino. He thought he was safe. What he didn't understand, what people who make choices like that never seem to understand, is that consequences aren't invented by other people. They grow out of the choices themselves. He asked me to coordinate that cleaning. He left a door locked that a stranger with a bobby pin could open. The truth about what was happening in that house was never going to stay hidden. It had too many cracks in it. I'm not a man who believes in fate or divine punishment or anything like that. I'm a former principal who spent 22 years watching human behavior up close. What I believe in is this: the way you treat people who can't fight back tells the whole story. It tells it slowly, over time, in small moments that add up, and eventually, someone opens a door you forgot to account for. What I hope for Abby, what I think about when I watch her reading under the covers with a flashlight she thinks I don't know about, is that she grows up understanding that her worth was never in question, that the failure was never hers. Children who go through what she went through sometimes carry it wrong. They carry it like it says something about them, instead of about the adults who let them down. Part of my job, every day, is to make sure she doesn't do that. She has a mind that catches things. She asked me once why some people are unkind, and I didn't give her a simple answer, because simple answers don't serve sharp kids. I told her that most unkindness comes from people not thinking carefully enough about someone other than themselves. That thinking carefully. Really stopping and considering what someone else might be feeling, what they might need, is something you have to practice, like any skill. She thought about that for a while. Then she said, "I think Gracie is good at that." And I said, "Yes, I think she is. Hold on to that friendship." That's what I want for her. The habit of thinking carefully about other people. The backbone to say no when something is wrong, even when it's inconvenient or frightening. And the basic decency to treat people, especially people who are smaller or more vulnerable, with the same dignity she'd want for herself. Those aren't complicated ideas, but they're the ones that determine, in the end, what kind of life you build and what kind of person you become when the door is locked and no one is watching. Abby drew that picture of the two of us last month. We're standing in front of the house. There's a garden, a yellow sun, a cat we don't own. She put a big smile on both of us. I'm not going to pretend I didn't tear up a little looking at it. She taped it to the fridge herself. That's where it's staying.